America has more prisoners than anyone else in the world, period. In 2013, the number of Americans in prison on probation and on parole was 6.9 million people. That's the entire population of LA, Boston, Seattle, Miami, Atlanta, and San Francisco combined. And if you just look at people who are in prisons, it's just under 2.2 million people, which is just under the next two largest prison populations, China and Russia, combined. But that's just because the US is so big, right? Well, if this pile of people here represents the whole world, then the US is just under 5% of that. And if you take the world's prison population, the US has 25% of that. So if you look at the relative stats, for every 100,000 people, the US has around 700 people in jail. That makes the US only second behind Seychelles, a country with 90,000 people and a UN prison for Somali pirates. But has this always been the case? Well, if you look at the historical incarceration levels, they remain fairly steady until the 80s.
The war on drugs. Drugs are menacing our society. They're killing our children.
Since the 80s, the prison population has more than quadrupled. So what caused all of this? A national explosion of crime and illegal drug use led to the passing of two seminal crime laws. In the 80s, it was the mandatory minimum sentences for drug crimes, and in the 90s, it was the three strikes laws. They essentially forced a prison sentence on every drug offender in America over the last 30 years. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988 made crack the only drug that triggered a mandatory minimum sentence just for possession. Get caught with more than 5 grams, you're going to jail for at least 5 years. Get caught multiple times in a state with a three strikes law, you might be going to jail for life without parole. And because of these laws, we now imprison more people on federal drug charges alone than the total federal prison population in 1980. And so while crack fueled longer prison sentences, the drug that still leads to the most arrests? Marijuana. A drug that 42% of American teens and adults have tried once in their lifetime. From 2001 to 2010, more than 8.2 million people were arrested for marijuana. In 2014, the amount of people arrested just for marijuana possession was more than the number of people arrested on all violent crimes put together. Way more. Not to mention that black people and white people use marijuana at the same rate, but nationally, black people are 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for it. In Washington, D.C., that number is 8 times. Well, how much does this all cost? Well, a lot. So, adjusted for inflation, in 1980, we spent about $17 billion on incarceration. This pile of potatoes here represents what we spent in 2010, which was $80 billion. The difference between those two is $63 billion. Well, what does $63 billion get you? Just the combined 2010 budgets for the EPA, the Department of Labor, the Department of Treasury, the National Science Foundation, and NASA. So what do you think is more important? Locking up nonviolent drug offenders for life, or protecting the planet, finding American jobs, and advancing the U.S. in space exploration?